All right, so today we're diving deep into a really fascinating case. Um, Alvin Taylor,
Okay.
an American serial killer,
Mm.
active in the mid-'80s.
Yeah.
And we've got, you send over some excerpts from his Wikipedia page.
Right.
And I guess we want to look at how someone who called himself a pacifist and a, quote, soldier of God could commit such awful crimes.
Mm.
And also, he's in a pretty unique situation right now, decades after being found incompetent to stand trial.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's so many aspects of this case
Yeah.
that just make it so fascinating and
Yeah.
really, cause us to kind of grapple with some tough things about mental illness, violence,
Yeah.
and kind of what are the limitations of our justice system,
Right.
all tied up in one.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning.
Yeah.
So Taylor was born in 1947 in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And, well, his childhood sounds like it was really, really rough.
Yeah.
Um, he himself said that his parents were physically abusive,
Mm-hmm.
neglectful, sometimes like just leaving him to wander the streets.
Jeez.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around how that kind of upbringing shapes someone.
Right. Yeah. It's certainly, it's kind of like, I mean, if you're looking at like what are the ingredients in a recipe for trauma?
Yeah.
That's certainly one of them.
Right.
And I think it's important to say, of course, like childhood trauma doesn't automatically equal, someone becoming violent,
Yeah.
but it's definitely like a big risk factor for mental health issues.
Yeah.
What's so interesting about his story, though, is that even with this really tough childhood,
Right.
he found himself drawn to like songwriting and meditation and even psychotherapy.
Wow. Okay.
It's almost like he was looking for peace and understanding,
Right.
which
Okay.
which makes his actions later
Right.
even more jarring.
It's so strange, right? It's
Yeah.
like these two opposite sides
Right.
pulling him in different directions. But then things really took a dark turn for him in 1969.
Okay.
He had this psychotic break while he was at a bar,
Uh-huh.
and he overheard some men talking,
Right.
and he became totally convinced they were going to kill him.
Oh, wow.
And he said later that even people on the bus and a motel maid were in on it.
Gosh.
So it's like his mind was really playing tricks on him,
Yeah.
creating this whole scary alternate reality.
Yeah, that sounds like, really classic paranoid delusions. Kind of a key feature of schizophrenia.
Right.
And I think what's really important to understand about these delusions is that they're not just like thoughts in someone's head.
Yeah.
They feel real.
Right.
Like they feel absolutely real.
Right. Right.
And that can lead to a lot of fear, anxiety, and in some cases, to violence because they feel like they need to defend themselves.
Yeah, it's frightening to think what it would be like to live with that kind of fear constantly.
It really is.
And sadly, this was just the beginning of Taylor's struggles with mental illness.
Yeah.
And through the 70s, his mental health just declined more and more.
Okay.
He was in and out of psychiatric clinics.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to make matters worse, he got convicted of delivering crack cocaine in 1980
Oh, wow.
and spent time in prison.
Okay.
It's like every step of the way there was a chance to step in and get
Oh.
him the support he needed, but it just
Yeah, it's a familiar pattern.
Yeah.
You see it in a lot of these cases where people commit violent acts.
right.
There's this history of trauma, mental health issues,
Right.
substance abuse. It's
Yeah.
all mixed up together. And
Yeah.
of course, like it's not everyone who has these problems
Right.
who turns to violence.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like a signal, a warning that we need to pay attention to these things and,
Yeah.
and have a better way of taking care of people's mental health.
It's not simple. It's not just a straightforward,
Yeah.
this equals that.
Right.
And in the early 80s, Taylor seemed to be trying to get his life together.
Okay.
He was working as a singer, entertainer
Oh, okay.
in clubs in Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Wow. Interesting.
It seems like he was making some positive steps.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shows you that people can be resilient even with all those hard things they've
Yeah.
been through.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, with Taylor, his mental health kept getting worse.
Okay.
Friends started noticing changes in him.
Mm-hmm.
He'd always been really religious, a pacifist even, but he started to like withdraw from reality, like
Yeah.
lost in his own world.
It's like those two sides we talked about, the peace and the darkness
Right.
were fighting and the darkness was winning.
Yeah.
And that's when things get really tragic.
Okay.
In 1985, he killed his first victim. Robert L. Williams,
Right.
a friend he'd met a couple years before. Now, we don't know exactly why, but Taylor became convinced that Williams had killed someone,
Okay.
and he ended up shooting Williams with a .357 Magnum
Wow.
and burying his body in the backyard of the place he was renting.
Gosh.
And what's crazy is that Williams's body wasn't found for 2 years.
What?
The lieutenant just stumbled on it by accident.
Wow.
It makes you think about how sometimes these awful things happen
Yeah.
and nobody even knows.
Right. It's kind of hiding in plain sight, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And sadly, it was only the beginning. So Robert Williams was murdered back in '85.
Right.
And this was just the first killing in a string of them.
Yeah.
But it's the way things escalated.
Right.
That's really striking.
Yeah.
In 1986, Taylor murdered his next-door neighbor, James Severson, in Eau Claire.
Okay.
But this one was different.
Yeah. Yeah, this case is really notable because of how violent it was.
Right.
Like, Taylor didn't just shoot Severson. He stabbed him over and over.
Right.
They struggled.
Yeah.
It seems like there was this rage, this aggression
Yeah.
that we didn't really see
Oh,
in the
yeah.
first murder.
It makes you think maybe his mental state was just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Schizophrenia is complex.
Right.
The symptoms can change over time.
Yeah.
Stress, not getting treatment,
Right.
even changes in medication that can bring on these episodes of psychosis.
Yeah.
And that leads to more paranoia, delusions,
Yeah.
aggression.
Yeah. And it seemed like that pattern just continued.
Right.
Later that year, Taylor met Daniel Lundgren,
Okay.
who managed a motel and restaurant where Taylor was living.
Okay.
And he shot Lundgren,
Mm-hmm.
and his body was found dumped by the side of the road.
Gosh.
But here's the really weird part.
Okay.
It was first thought to be a car accident. Yeah, Lundgren's car had crashed,
Okay.
and he was taken to the hospital.
Right.
And he died like 30 hours later.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until after Taylor was arrested that they found the gunshot wounds,
Wow.
and they had to exhume and examine the body.
It's this part's really interesting to me because
Yeah.
it makes you wonder about, could there have been a misdiagnosis
Right.
in cases like this?
Yeah.
Where, you have violence and mental illness all mixed
If
up.
they'd found those gunshot wounds earlier.
Right. Could they have saved him?
Yeah.
It shows you how important it is to investigate thoroughly, especially when the circumstances
Right.
surrounding a death are unclear.
It really makes you think. And tragically, Taylor wasn't done.
Yeah.
In early '87, he killed Timothy Hayden, his roommate at the time.
Okay.
And this one was fueled by another one of his delusions.
Okay.
He saw a calendar
Mm-hmm.
with a model on it.
Right.
And it reminded him of Hayden's girlfriend.
Okay.
And he somehow became convinced that Hayden was going to hurt her
Oh, wow.
with a gun that he'd just bought.
Wow.
It's just these twisted perceptions.
Yeah, it's just, these irrational fears.
Yeah.
I mean, it really shows you the power of delusions
Yeah.
to control someone's behavior.
Right.
Like for someone like Taylor, who's deep in psychosis,
Yeah.
those beliefs feel totally real.
Right.
And it makes them act in ways that just don't make sense.
Right.
And are really dangerous.
And it's this case, the murder of Timothy Hayden,
Yeah.
that leads to Taylor's arrest
Oh, okay.
in a really dramatic way.
Okay, so how did that happen?
So picture this. It's April 3rd, 1987.
Right.
The funeral for Timothy Hayden's taking place.
Oh, okay.
And who shows up?
Oh, no.
Alvin Taylor.
He went to the funeral
Yeah.
of the man he'd just killed.
I mean, that's bold.
That's something else.
Yeah.
It's hard to say what he was thinking. Was he like trying to get some messed up closure?
Right.
Or was he so out of touch with reality
Yeah.
that he just didn't get how serious it was?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Right.
But we do know the police were waiting for him.
Right.
And they arrested him right there at the funeral.
Like something out of a movie.
Right.
And gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Immediately after being arrested, Taylor confessed to all 4 murders.
He just came out and said it.
He didn't deny anything.
Wow.
But then, well, you can probably guess what happened.
What?
Those delusions, they came right back.
Okay.
He started saying he was a soldier of God,
Oh, gosh.
that he heard voices from something he called the Force.
The Force.
Yeah.
What did he mean by that?
I know, it sounds like a sci-fi movie.
It does.
Yeah.
So do we know what he was referring to?
Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of details in the sources
Okay.
about what he actually meant by the force. It seems like it was all part of his delusions,
Yeah.
mixed in with his religious beliefs
Right.
and his distorted view of reality.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty common with schizophrenia. People come up with these really elaborate
Right.
belief systems that
Yeah.
make sense to them,
Yeah.
but are totally detached from what's actually real.
Yeah, it just shows how, for someone like that, there's no difference
Right.
between what's real and what's not.
Right.
And even though their actions are horrific,
Uh-huh.
they're coming from these deep beliefs
Yeah.
that they think are absolutely true.
Right. And that brings us to one of the big questions we're looking at here.
Yeah.
How does the justice system handle cases
Right.
involving mental illness?
Especially when the crimes are this terrible.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation.
Yeah. So after all this, after his arrest and these strange claims, did he go to trial?
Well, that's where things get even trickier. So Taylor confessed to the murders,
Yeah.
but the court said he wasn't competent to stand trial
Right.
for the murder charges
Okay.
because of his paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He was found incompetent for murder,
Right.
but he was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison for the attempted murder of Paul Zwick.
Wait, how is that possible?
Right.
How can he be incompetent for the murders,
Yeah.
but competent for attempted murder?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of the problems we run into when we try to mix
Yeah.
law and mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the rules for competency to stand trial,
Right.
they can be different depending on the case.
Okay.
And it often comes down to whether the defendant can understand the charges,
Right.
help their lawyer,
Yeah.
and act appropriately in court.
Right.
So maybe in the attempted murder case,
Right.
the court thought Taylor was okay on those points.
Maybe his mental state was a little better at that time.
Right, right.
Or maybe the evidence was more clear-cut.
Yeah.
It's a very tricky situation.
Yeah, you're trying to balance things so carefully.
Yeah.
You have this man who committed terrible crimes,
Right.
but he's also struggling with this severe mental illness
Right.
that probably played a huge role in what he did.
Exactly.
So what happens then?
Right.
I mean, does he just get off?
That's the tough question.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right.
In Taylor's case, because he was found incompetent,
Right.
he was sent to the Mendota Mental Health Institution
Okay.
in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And that's where he still is today.
So after over 30 years, he's still in that facility.
Yeah.
Is that normal for cases like this?
It's not unusual,
Okay.
especially when someone commits really serious crimes while they're, really mentally ill.
Right.
The idea is to protect the public.
Right. And to try to treat the person,
Right.
hoping they can get better someday.
Okay.
But it also brings up some ethical issues about keeping someone locked up indefinitely, especially when they might not have even understood what they were doing when they committed the crime.
Yeah, and that brings us back to the question we started with.
Right.
What's the right way to handle cases like Alvin Taylor's?
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between justice and compassion?
Exactly.
And how do we deal with this complicated mix
Yes.
of mental illness and responsibility for your actions?
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
We've talked about Taylor's past, how he got sick, those awful crimes,
Right.
and now he's locked up in this mental health facility.
Yeah.
It's a tough story.
It is.
And I bet a lot of people listening are thinking, okay, what happens now? What about Alvin Taylor?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's hard, There's no easy answer. Taylor's case has been reviewed lots of times over the years.
Okay.
He's even asked to be released, saying he's better now.
Mhm.
And there have been times when doctors have seen some improvement,
Okay.
but it never goes anywhere.
Right.
The courts, they're worried he might be violent again or escape,
Right.
so they always say no.
So he's kind of stuck,
Yeah,
caught between what he did
right.
and his mental illness.
Yeah, it's like a deadlock.
Right.
There's no way out.
You said the courts are worried about public safety, but
Yeah,
is that still a real concern after all this time?
yeah,
I mean, Taylor's in his 70s now,
right.
and you said his mental health is getting worse because of his age.
Yeah.
At some point, doesn't the risk go down?
Mm-hmm.
Like, isn't it more about punishing him
Yeah.
than actually trying to help him get better?
Those are good points.
Yeah.
When people get older, the chance of them being violent, especially suddenly violent, usually goes down.
Right.
Their health isn't as good.
Yeah.
It's harder to move around. Even their thinking changes as they age.
Yeah.
It all plays a part.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean there's no risk at all.
Right.
But it's something the courts and doctors have to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot of ethical and legal questions.
It is.
Where do you balance protecting people and treating someone with a serious mental illness humanely?
Right.
It seems like it's always a struggle to find that balance.
It really is. And there are strong arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
Some people say public safety has to come first, especially with someone who's done such violent things.
Right.
They say any risk is too much.
Yeah.
But then others say that keeping someone locked up forever, especially when they might not have even understood they were on trial, that's not right.
Right.
It's like a cruel punishment.
Yeah. I can see both sides.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
But what about Taylor himself?
Yeah.
He's been in this facility for over 3 decades.
Yeah.
What's his life like now?
Yeah.
What's next for him?
Honestly, it doesn't look good. Yeah. From what we know, his mental state is getting even worse.
Right.
Which is sadly kind of common when someone with schizophrenia is locked up for so long.
Right.
You have no control, not many people to talk to. It's a harsh environment.
Yeah.
It makes you think, is keeping him there really helping?
Right.
Or is it just making him suffer more?
It's sad.
Yeah.
This guy, he had such a hard life from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Then this awful mental illness.
Yeah.
Committed these horrible crimes while he was sick.
Right.
And now there's just no hope.
It's a tragedy all around.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. And it makes you realize we need to talk more about this.
Yeah.
How we as a society deal with mental illness, violence, what justice really means.
Yeah.
We have to find a way to keep people safe.
Yeah.
But also be compassionate.
Right.
And treat people humanely.
Exactly.
Cases like Alvin Taylor's, they force us to face these tough questions.
Yeah.
And try to make things better.
I agree completely. This case, it shows us that we need to keep talking, keep researching, and keep looking for better, more humane ways to handle these really hard situations.
Absolutely. Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
This whole dive into Alvin Taylor's life, his crimes, why he's still locked up. It's been fascinating, but also really disturbing.
It is.
It sticks with you.
Yeah.
Makes you think about how complicated mental illness is,
right.
the limits of our justice system, the ethical choices we have to make.
Exactly.
Thank you for taking this journey with us.
Yeah.
Keep learning, keep diving deep.
Absolutely.